People always ask, like, how should you eat chocolate? Should you like let it melt on your mouth for 10 minutes? It doesn't matter. Whatever makes you happy is totally cool with us.
Hi, I'm Ashley Cheney, and this is the Dear Food Podcast. Have you ever noticed how it seems like pretty much everyone likes to talk about food? Yeah, I've noticed that too. And it seems like the best way to get to know someone is to actually ask them about food. Whether that's on the red carpet, like I've had the chance to do, or whether that's just talking to someone in line at the grocery store. Some of the easiest and most illuminating conversations I've ever had have been about food. So this podcast is actually that. Really just connecting people through the stories that we tell about food. We'll use food to take us back to the places that we have remembered so fondly, whether that place is just a really special time in your life, or whether that's actually using a memory to transport us around the world. Food will take us there and make us feel all kinds of warm and fuzzy along the way. So let's dig in. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode. This week, you guys, we are talking about one of my all-time favorite foods ever, and that is, of course, chocolate. Who doesn't love chocolate? I really can't think of anybody, certainly not in my circle. But for this week's episode, I was lucky enough to grab David Menkes from a local chocolate factory here in Los Angeles. It's called LetterPress Chocolate, and I was fortunate enough to stumble upon this shop by walking down the street and seeing a sign that said chocolate tastings $10. And that single chocolate tasting experience was really transformative to not just the way I now consume chocolate, but also just this whole other world of adventure that is actually found within chocolate making. I know that might sound a little, I don't know, hoity-toity or something, but it's true, you guys. David is one of a very, very small select group of people who actually make bean-to-bar chocolate. And I should also mention that it's David and his wife, Corey. They're a fantastic power duo in the chocolate making space. But I just had David for this interview, though. Corey, hello, shout out to you. She kind of also runs operations at LetterPress in West LA. David is very much, when I thought that I was a chocolate lover, oh no, my friend. David put me to shame. He understands and explains really the science behind chocolate making, and also, I know he will change your perspective on what goes into the chocolate that we're eating. I mean, it's really, really involved. It is such a huge undertaking, filled with danger and all kinds of really cool things, which, yes, we will get into in this episode. I am talking bribing police officers in the Dominican Republic and getting chased down the street with machete. I'm not joking. These things really happened all in the name of chocolate. So what it's really done is made me appreciate every bite of chocolate that I have just a little bit more. And as someone who already really appreciated chocolate, it was a whole new world that I didn't even know, a whole nother level of chocolate love that I didn't know was out there. All right, all my chocolate lovers, are you ready to have your minds blown? Let's do this. Let's dig in to this week's episode. Well, David, hi, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Definitely. I'm a huge fan of your store, and your shop, and of course your chocolate. And I can't wait to dive in and talk all about just chocolate because that's of course our food of the day today. Before we do that though, I start every episode by asking our guests the same question. So I prepped you ahead of time, but let's go ahead and start it off with the first taste. So David, do you remember the first food you ever tasted?
The earliest thing, I'm sure wasn't the first thing that I ate, obviously, but the first thing that I remember was I was at a Baskin Robbins with my dad. I was probably about 2.5 or maybe 3 years old. And I remember I couldn't quite see over the display case to see all the different flavors. So sometimes my dad would kind of like pick me up and kind of show me. And I pointed to the vanilla and I said, I really want vanilla. And my dad said, well, no, vanilla is not a flavor. You have to get chocolate. And I really didn't want chocolate. I wanted vanilla, and it might have even been cookies and cream, but it was a vanilla base ice cream for sure. And he's like, no, you're totally not getting that. You're going to get chocolate. So my dad is actually a hardcore chocolate nut.
Oh.
And so that's one of my earliest memories of food in general. And the irony is now that I run a chocolate shop, but also that whenever I do get out to get like either ice cream or a milkshake with my kid, I usually get vanilla.
There's
Yeah.
so much to unpack there. I love that. Well, so vanilla, you had to get the chocolate ice cream at the shop. That's what you ended up getting. You didn't get your vanilla?
Right. Yeah. So the funny thing is that my dad has this very peculiar habit of whenever he eats chocolate ice cream, and my younger brother has this same thing happen too. He manages to get it pretty much all over his face, not just in his mouth, but the joke is at one point my younger brother was eating an ice cream cone, and he managed to get some chocolate ice cream on his ear. I don't know how he did that, but it's just a thing. It's very messy eaters, and
Sure. Yeah, hey, stuff happens when you get excited about ice cream. I get it.
yeah, and the funny thing is that I actually have a phobia of getting food on my face. So whenever I'm out, eating or whatever, I'm always there, with the napkin, making sure like there's nothing on my face, right? I'm always freaked out
Oh,
about that. It's kind of a lifelong phobia. Just seeing my dad when I was a little kid, having an ice cream all over. I mean, he would get it on his
that's
shirt, he'd get it on his
traumatizing. Yeah.
pants, and it was just like, oh man, it was crazy. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, I'd be hard pressed to. I'm sort of the exact opposite. I would always choose chocolate every time. And I wonder, did you like the taste of the chocolate ice cream, or were you just still mega disappointed that it wasn't vanilla?
I think that it's one of those things that I got used to. I really like the way that when you take milk and you add vanilla to it, when you make like a vanilla ice cream, I really like that combination. And I think I didn't discover this until many, many years later, but most chocolate to me doesn't taste like chocolate. And the irony is that most industrial chocolate uses vanilla. So
Exactly. Yeah.
what you're tasting isn't even the cacao because most industrial chocolate's like 10-15% cocoa. It's not 60, 70, 80% like what we do. You're not even tasting cacao. And so I think for me, I just really liked that balance. And I think it was mainly because it wasn't so much that I love vanilla, it was more the fact that the chocolate that I was eating wasn't very good.
Just didn't taste like chocolate. Yeah.
No, and the thing is now it's kind of crazy. If Corey and I go to like a restaurant or whatever, and we get a chocolate dessert, we can taste the way that whoever manufactured the chocolate, we can actually taste how it was roasted, and almost always it's burnt. So there's this weird kind of acrid taste. It's covered up by the sugar and all that, but it's underneath, and we can definitely pick up on that. And it's not the most pleasant thing.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we cannot go another minute before we dive into, of course, our food of the day, which is chocolate. Because of course, the irony of your story of it not being able to have chocolate. I know from visiting your shop that LetterPress has a pretty unique origin story. Can you just give our listeners a quick history of, your shop itself and how it came to be?
Yeah, so we run a little chocolate factory in West LA, and we make bean to bar chocolates. We import cocoa beans from around the world. The journey really started back in 2011. My wife Corey and I were on vacation in St. Lucia, and we weren't thinking about chocolate one way or the other. We were just kind of bombing around the island and just like checking out local like restaurants and things like that. And we were looking for a spot to eat lunch, and we pulled over on the side of the road, and we got some lunch. We are just kind of chilling out, looking out on like the ocean, and then there was a kind of a forest nearby, and we saw these really weird looking trees with these weird looking pods on them. And I asked one of the locals, I said, "What is that?" And they said, "That's a chocolate tree. That's cacao." And I said, "What?" And they're like, "Oh, that's where chocolate comes from." And so after we finished eating, we went across the street, and just one of the locals just got a machete, cut one of them open for us. We got to see the white beans on the inside, and we're like, "Well, it doesn't look like it's not even brown. It's white. Like, how do you get chocolate from that?" They said, "Well, it has to be fermented." So they actually took us up the road a little bit to the fermentary where they opened up one of these trays, and you can see all the cacao drying there. And that did actually smell like chocolate. What ended up happening was, of all the places to just pull over on the side of the road, we happened to stop at the Rabot estate. So it's the longest single continuously operational cocoa plantation in the world. It was established in like 1745, and it's still in
Wow.
operation today. I still have the photos of that trip, and I remember that's my very first photo that I ever took of cacao. And that kind of got us started at least thinking about like, wow, this is like a new thing we can kind of get into
Yeah.
in our spare time. And, unlike wine, you can have some in the morning or have some, after lunch or
Hey,
whatever. It's just
sometimes wine in the morning is okay. Depends. No
totally, yeah. I
judgment.
mean, I was working at Dreamworks Animation at the time, and it was the sort of thing where it's a very social place. Everyone kind of hangs out with each other, and everyone kind of visits each other's cubicles.
I don't think we've talked about our animation connection in the background. I have my whole production background is animation. I did not know that about you.
Oh, I didn't know that about you either.
What were you working on at DreamWorks? And then I want to hear more about the chocolate.
So the first movie that I worked on there was How to Train Your Dragon 2. And so I was working on that and kind of discovering chocolate at the same time. And so that was the first time that I was working at DreamWorks with a team, because when I first was hired, I was working with like one guy in like Northern
Yeah.
California remotely. And
Mm-hmm.
I was working from home half the time. And it was this weird kind of, like special project type thing. So I wasn't really interacting with other people, but on Dragons 2, that was all done down in Glendale, and so I was working a lot with other people around me. So I became known as Chocolate Dave. I had all these chocolate bars
Yes.
on my desk. It was crazy.
I love that.
And the problem was that people were coming by my desk all the time. What ended up happening was, I remember one day I got pulled into HR at DreamWorks, and they said, "Look, we really appreciate your enthusiasm for chocolate, but people are coming by your desk all day.
Oh
And it's interfering with your work, and we're not telling you not to do it, but maybe you should just do a chocolate tasting like after lunch, like once a week or something like
Oh
that." I said,
my
"That's a great idea."
gosh.
So I formally founded the DreamWorks Chocolate Society.
So, I have so many questions to ask you about chocolate itself. So, I think we've gotten us up to the point where LetterPress is open at the location that I think is where my part of the story comes in. And I've come to actually do a chocolate tasting and a tour back, obviously, pre-COVID times. And I'll just say that I can hear just even in the telling of your story how important the quality is and the process. And I likened my experience of coming in to have a chocolate tasting very much like going in to do a wine tasting, or really being educated about the things that we were eating. So I know that you kind of have talked about sort of the process of making chocolate from bean to bar, but could you kind of summarize for us what it takes to actually make a chocolate bar from bean to bar?
Sure. So first of all, we buy our beans from all around the world. Typically, it's Central and South America, anywhere within the cacao belt. And so when we get the beans, they've been fermented and dried. They usually have a little bit of a brownish color to them. Sometimes they can be a little bit more on the purplish side. So what we have to do, the first thing we have to do is we have to roast them, because the chocolate flavor comes out when you roast. It's the Maillard reaction, the same thing when you toast a piece of toast or something like that. That browning action really helps bring out the flavors. So we roast it. We have twin convection ovens. We roast the beans. We do fairly, I would say, very light roasts for us. 230 degrees for like 20 minutes, very, very light. So from there, once the beans have been roasted, we have to separate the shell from the nib on the inside. If anyone's ever seen cocoa nibs, they're the little, they're kind of like the same consistency as, like, say, a peanut or something. It's like almost like a nut. It's a little bit softer when they're cold. So what ends up happening is we crack them open and we separate the shell from the nib in a process called winnowing. So what we do is we pass an air current over the shells and nibs, and the lighter shells get blown away. The heavier nibs go into the bottom of the buckets. So the buckets then are just the nib. The nibs themselves are about 50% cocoa butter and 50% cocoa solids. So what you can do is you can grind that down to a liquid. And what you can do is you can actually put that liquid under pressure, and you can squeeze the cocoa butter out of it. So what you're left with is cocoa powder. So cocoa powder is ground up nibs without the butter, and then cocoa butter is the ground up nibs without the solids.
Okay, got
Okay,
it.
but they're two halves of the same thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we don't separate anything here. We use the nib entirely. We don't get rid of cocoa butter or anything like that. And then we put that into these stone grinders. So imagine a large drum with two kind of big granite wheels with a granite base, and you put the cocoa nibs in the spinning machine, and they get crushed. And as the nibs get crushed, they release the cocoa butter, and it starts to liquefy within maybe 30, 40 minutes. It's a pretty quick process. And we're talking like 40 pounds of nibs. It'll be completely liquid, yeah, in under an hour. It's very, very fast. So it's important to note that not all sugar is the same, just like all cocoa beans aren't the same. the sugar that we use, it's called native. It comes from Brazil, and it's unrefined cane sugar. So unrefined cane sugar does not use the bleaching process that refined sugar does. And not all sugar companies, but some sugar companies will use cow bone char for that bleaching process, that filtration process. So
What? Cow bones? Oh my gosh.
cow bone, yeah. So why, like, refined cane sugar is not necessarily vegan.
Did not know that. Holy cow. Wow.
And we just figured, so it's just two ingredients anyways, the cocoa beans and the sugar. Might as well just keep it vegan. It's easier, right?
Yeah.
So we then grind that down together. And so what the thing is it's funny. I don't take offense to most things that people assume about chocolate, but I do take a little bit of an issue when people refer to what we make as candy bars. The reason that is because the word candy to me means that you kind of assume like a Snickers bar or like a Baby Ruth or something. It's something that's meant to just be opened and consumed and you're done, and that's it. And that's not what we set out to do. What we make is supposed to be savored, and you're really supposed to take your time with it, right? So the other thing too is that the candying process is actually melting sugar, and it's important to note that when you grind chocolate, you never change the molecular structure of sugar. All you're doing is reducing the size, right? So imagine again that kind of big wheel spinning around, and then you have the granite base, and so when you grind down these nibs smaller and smaller, and then you add the sugar and you grind the sugar smaller and smaller, it gets ground down to a very fine particulate size. So to the point that it just feels completely liquid
Mm-hmm.
on your palate. So we typically grind anywhere from 48 hours to 96 hours, sometimes even longer. So once we're done grinding the chocolate down, it's totally liquid. We pour it into steam pans and we let it age for about a month. And we do that for two reasons. One is that, again, there's those volatiles that are in there. The flavor of the chocolate kind of settles down over a few weeks. And what we do is, if we don't know how long to age something, we'll just break off a little sample off of the block. We'll taste it, then we'll compare our notes week after week. Once our notes are the same for 2 or 3 weeks in a row, we know, okay, that's been aged long enough.
So it's aging in what looks like a big block of what looks like chocolate. That's how it develops flavor in that state.
Yes, exactly. So when
Okay.
you first start grinding it, it will change in texture and flavor a lot. And then those changes kind of start to subdue over time. And then, like I said, by the time we age, it depends on the origin. But yeah, like we want to make sure that whatever we're selling to people is we're confident of what that bar is going to taste like. And I've
Right,
seen a
right.
lot of chocolate makers where they'll finish grinding it and then they'll throw it straight into the tempering machine and then they mold it up into bars and they package it and they assume that it's going to age on the shelf. But we feel that we would rather get that done here so that we know if for some
You're
reason,
controlling the experience. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, if we sell something in a store, you know, if someone buys it that afternoon, as soon as it goes on the shelf, it already is going to taste exactly how we intended it. So
Right,
that's
right.
why we do that. And so what we do is from those blocks, we melt them. It takes about 14 hours for those blocks to completely liquefy again at about 120 degrees. Then we pour it into a tempering machine, which is simply just a bowl that spins around with a heating and cooling element. We crystallize the liquid. So chocolate has 6 different forms of crystals within it, each one with a different melting temperature. So by controlling the heating and the cooling curve of that liquid, you can determine which crystals are growing and which ones are melted out so that, it melts in your mouth and not, just on the shelf or, while you're holding it. Now, untempered chocolate that hasn't been crystallized, if you hold it in your hand, it will basically instantly liquefy. You can't even handle it. Like it would literally just get all over your hands. You wouldn't be able to touch it at all. So
Wow, wow.
that's why we crystallize it. And then after that, we package it up and then sell. So that's kind of the process from bean to bar.
Wow. Okay. So there's a couple of things I just kind of want to come back in and dissect a bit, starting with the beans themselves. We've kind of flippantly said, oh, we'll gather the beans. And I've heard, tales of you actually going down to these incredible places all around the world, which makes chocolate making seem like a flippin' dream job, frankly. And then there's other times where maybe you're importing beans, from elsewhere. So how do you, and I guess in the most basic way, how do you actually get the beans yourself?
It's a good question. So there's a few different ways. The thing to remember that most cocoa beans are harvested and gathered by co-ops, and we're
Hmm.
talking annual production of 20, 30, 40 tons. we're a very small chocolate maker. We only bring in maybe half a metric ton to 1 metric ton of any one origin at any one time. So we're too small to bring in a 40-foot container, which would be about 26 metric tons. So we do a couple different things. We will do what's known as collaborative shipping. So the chocolate industry is very open and collaborative. We all like talk to each other. So basically what will end up happening is an email chain can get started like, hey, I'm bringing in something from Tanzania. Does anyone else want to bring that in? And then so what we'll do is we'll divvy it up. And I'll say, well, I'll take a ton, and then so-and-so will take a ton, so-and-so will take 2 tons or whatever. And then we divvy it up once it shows up. So we share that cost of coming in. Another thing that we do, which is logistically much more difficult, is air freight. So air freighting is when, so for example, like our Jamaica and our Sao Tome. So Sao Tome is an island archipelago off the west coast of Africa. There are exports that go into containers, but they usually go to Europe. I have not heard of any large scale importing of Sao Tome cocoa beans into the United States. So we have to air freight that in. So literally the bags are put onto a plane on whatever commercial flight happens to be coming to LA. We have to go down to the airport. We have to load the car full of cocoa beans, and we put it into storage. So that's another way of doing it. And then the third way is, if we're on a trip, we'll, physically bring back beans with us, but that tends to be much smaller amounts. We would never bring back like, dozens and
Well,
dozens of bags of
you
beans
can't
that way.
carry that much, right?
No,
I mean,
no.
I think my brain is not computing how much it actually, carries, it
Yeah.
weighs to find these beans.
So one bag of cacao typically weighs about 70 kilos or about 155 pounds. That's the industry standard for a bag. That being said, I think Jamaica is like 55 pounds or something, and then I think Costa Rica is also about 55 pounds. So it just depends on where the beans are coming from and how that particular project wants to bag things up. But if it's 150 pounds, it's very difficult to kind of manhandle it and move it around. We have to kind of drag them. We can't really lift something like that up. It's really difficult.
155-pound bag of cacao beans. And now this is, again, people, if they were in your shop, that you'd have these wonderful visuals to kind of show people. But we're talking about the thing that, like, when you see, if you've ever seen a photo of somebody hacksawing a cocoa fruit off of and correct me when I'm saying the wrong thing, but off of a tree, and you split it open and there's those white kind of beans. That's what you're talking about? It's a bag full of those beans?
Kind of. So the thing is that what we actually end up bringing in, the bags of beans, they look almost like a darker version of an almond. So it has
I
a
see, I
shell
see.
on it, but that white stuff is completely gone. It dries and kind of creates a hard kind of a shell, and it's totally clear.
So then you've got this bag, 155-pound bag of, the nuts that you just explained, the beans that you just explained. How many chocolate bars would a big bag like that yield?
Yeah, good question. So the way it works is when we make a 70% dark chocolate bar, 70% is the cocoa, 30% is sugar. Okay. So what ends up happening is when we take the beans, we roast them, we get rid of the shell. By the time we have taken the beans and it's reduced down to a liquid, you lose about 30%. It's typically the shell, it could be some of the fines, things like that, anything that's broken off. So we're left with about 30%. Then again, we're 70%, then we're adding 30% sugar. So the way it works is a 155-pound bag will make 155 pounds of 70% dark chocolate,
Oh,
one to
okay.
one.
I see. I see. I
So
see. I
I
see.
just did the math really quickly. A 70 kilo, 155-pound bag will yield 1,166 bars, generally speaking. Generally speaking.
Wow. That sounds like a lot to me, but that's probably small potatoes now for you. But that sounds like a ton to me.
Well, so we make between 5 and 6 thousand bars a month.
Oh, wow.
So we typically what we do is we try to grind a whole bunch of beans at a time, and then because we like to age everything, so the summer is usually when we're grinding a lot. We're just like making block after block after block. We just stack them up, and then starting in say October, November, we're not grinding as much because again we don't really have time to age anything. So that's when we're mainly making most of our bars for the holiday season. Is stuff that we've done our grinding over the summer. One thing I didn't mention earlier is that the shelf life of all this stuff is incredibly long. So the beans themselves are good for about 8 to 10 years because they've been
Oh my
fermented and
gosh.
dried. I mean,
Wow.
there's nothing to go bad. Once we've made it into finished chocolate, the shelf life is easily 7, 8 years or more. We've actually pulled that chocolate that we made back in 2014. It's still totally fine. So
Who is letting chocolate sit around their house for 7 years? It's psychopaths. Nobody has chocolate in their house
we
and
have,
not eating it.
we always have little samples of stuff that we made, and we just kind of file it away because we never really throw stuff away because, like, let's say, for example, that we got some really interesting beans from Brazil, and it's like, hey, were those any good? And then we go back and we revisit the chocolate, and we're like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. Let's bring that in. So we
For
do
you as a
actually.
chocolate maker, it absolutely makes sense from a scientific purpose to keep your
Sure.
beans. As a consumer, I can barely get from my car to the house without eating. Like I picked up a shipment or a little bundle of chocolate from your shop last week, and by the time I got home, I had accidentally eaten an entire bar. And that
Nice.
might be offensive because I know it's meant to be savored, but it's so I was like, that's the challenge for me is just getting it home.
So what I would say is, as long as you're enjoying it, that's the speed at which you should be eating it. So people always ask, like, how should you eat chocolate? Should you like let it melt on your mouth for 10 minutes with, in a dark room with your eyes closed, listening to white noise, or do you just like eat it while you're watching a movie? It doesn't matter. Whatever makes you happy is totally cool with us. So what we do personally is we take a bite, and we chew it a couple times so it kind of just melts on your palate, and then you can let it kind of melt for like a couple seconds just to really appreciate it. So what you want to do is you want to kind of just get it evenly distributed on your tongue, and you're not just like eating it and then swallowing it. You really want to try to appreciate, especially like, say, like our Jamaica or our Bolivia. The finish on those is incredibly long. I mean, I was trying to remember. I think it was about a week ago was the last time we made our Bolivia, and I mean, it's like I took a little sample, and I was going and doing some other stuff, and it was like 5, 6, 7 minutes later, and I mean, you can still really get that really nice
Wow.
lingering finish. That's one of my personal favorite bars that we make. That's kind of what I would. That's what I have in my head as far as what I want to make. Is that kind of
Yeah.
chocolate? If that makes sense.
It's really delicious, and I think your Bolivia has even won an award. Yeah,
The
has it
Bolivia
won?
has not. We have not submitted the Bolivia to anything yet. That being said, I think we're submitting it.
Well, can we actually talk about like that? That was new to me too. Is that I came into the shop and I saw like some on one of your bars or on one of your signage was something about winner of the Chocolate Academy something something, and I'm like, there's a Chocolate Academy. What is this world of chocolate that I don't know? So my question for you is actually there's two things I would love for you to address, which is you are a tried and true chocolate maker. And I think that's different from a chocolatier. And I want you to explain the difference to the rest of the world who maybe goes to a chocolate shop and says, oh, I went to this chocolatier and it was great and they made the chocolate, but they didn't really make the chocolate. Can you just first break down the difference between a chocolatier and a chocolate maker and why you guys are so unique
Sure.
as
So,
chocolate makers?
so there's a couple of things. First of all, we start from the fermented and dried cacao beans. We do the entire process within one building. It's just no one else is doing any part of the process except for us. I mentioned earlier about the fact that after we're done grinding the chocolate, we turn it into blocks to make it aged, right? So most chocolatiers will either buy one of those blocks or they'll buy chocolate chips that have been made by an industrial company somewhere, and they melt those down and then they'll make them into truffles and bonbons, and they do their own custom fillings and things like that. It's an incredibly difficult, amazing art form, and I have the utmost respect for it. So I don't want to sound like I'm disparaging it. I just want people to understand that there is absolutely a difference, and why we don't make truffles and bonbons and things like that, because we are spending so much time, working with single origin beans, and 70% as opposed to, say, a milk chocolate bar or whatever. The best way that I like to explain it is the difference between a distillery and a bartender. A bartender can be amazing. They can take all these different crazy things, they blend it all together, and make really fantastic drinks. They're awesome. It's totally its own thing. But then there's the distillery who makes just the raw ingredient, right? And so I would say we're more like a brewery or a distillery as opposed to, say, a bartender.
A mixed drink. That's a perfect analogy. And it makes total sense, and it's also, explains why when you taste the chocolate, you're just tasting, and again, not disparaging either, but it's just truly pure chocolate. I mean, I coined myself a chocolate lover for sure, but you guys you guys are the real deal. And I heard there's only like what 100 actual chocolate makers that make that raw pure chocolate in the world, something like that. Is that true?
So, in the United States, I've heard a bunch of different numbers. As far as I understand, the latest number is closer to 200, but I would say the vast majority of those are people who are kind of doing stuff at home or maybe at a local farmer's market. It's very, very localized. I'd
Hmm.
say as far as like nationally distributed bean to bar chocolate makers, I mean it's under 50,
Yeah.
honestly. As
Wow.
far as like stuff that you can find in a store in any real sense, and we know most of those folks. Like I said, it's a very small community. There are a lot more now than when we got started. When we got started, I mean, there were maybe 3 or 4 nationally distributed, artisanal bean to bar chocolate makers. Now, yeah, like I said, there's at least several dozen. So it is definitely growing. And I'm really curious to see, in the future, kind of how that industry is going to grow because there are all these really great new farm projects that have kind of evolved in the last 5 or 6 years because there's so many chocolate makers. Now there's a lot more cocoa growers trying to say, hey, I want to do really, really fantastic growing and provide really great cacao. So, I mean, half the stuff that we make, those companies weren't even in business 10 years ago. It's all very new.
Yeah. I'm picturing this like little secret society akin to Harry Potter where you guys all text each other like, "Hey, I'm going down to Tanzania, want some beans?" I mean, that's like I know that you say that like that's actually how you guys coordinate getting beans, but I mean, my brain like almost can't even comprehend it. And I do want to get back to the awards because I think that's a really cool just interesting Academy of Chocolate that I didn't know about. Before we do that, can you just kind of dispel a rumor for me or maybe give me the true story? But when I was in your shop doing a chocolate tasting, your one of your employees was telling me something along the lines of like you got chased, you were down on a trip to bring some beans back home, and you got like chased out of the Amazon with a machete or something trying to bring home beans. Is this story true, and can you give us the real deal?
I've had a few interesting scrapes over the years. I'm trying to remember the machete thing. I don't know if that had anything to do with cacao on that trip. That was more like I was in the wrong neighborhood. I was in Barbados and I had a backpack on. It was stupid, and it was kind of getting late in the day, and someone had like said, kind of called me over, like, hey, why don't you come over here or something? And I saw he had a machete in his hand. I'm like, this is totally not good, and I kind of just tried to casually walk away, and then I would turn a corner and then I would bolt as fast as I could, and then turn another corner and bolt as fast as I could. As far as a like related to chocolate story, when we were in the DR, Tom and I were in a car, and he was driving. We were in Santo Domingo, and we were making a left. And apparently, you can't make a left at this one red light, and we did. So, cop pulls us over and says, "Hey, you weren't supposed to do that." And they were talking, and they're like arguing back and forth, and the guy kept saying, you need to get out of the car, and Tom was like, if we get out of the car, we're going to go to jail, like we're not getting out of the car. And so
Oh my
at
God.
one point he leans over and he's like, how much money do you have on you? And I don't know, like I've got like maybe 1,000 pesos, like $30 or whatever it was. He's like, just fold it up and give it to me now. I'm like, all right. So I just go in my wallet and I get it, and he kind of folds up in his hand, and he kind of looks, and he like goes to shake, the cop's hand. The cop looks down, kind of looks, and he's like, all right, go ahead. So we were able to get away with that. So
Oh my God. The dangers of chocolate making.
things you
Oh,
couldn't
I love
necessarily
it.
do in the United States. But yeah, I mean, I would say I think parts of Peru are interesting. So when I was down in Peru the last time, we worked with a project called Ukiali River Cacao, and what I tasted through all the different lots of beans that they were buying from all these different farms in the surrounding area. And I took my 3 favorites, and we did our own custom blend. And so what we did was we put a tag on these bags that no one but me and the farm manager knew. So when we brought the container in, I knew which bags were mine. So then we were able to bring those into the shop, and then we made chocolate out of it. And so that's our Ukiali bar, which is our most awarded bar. I think we're up to 17 or 18 awards on that. So
Wow.
that we submitted to the International Chocolate Awards, which is based out of London. But there's also the Academy of Chocolate Awards, which is also based out of London.
I mean, this is wild. Who would have ever known that there's an Academy of Chocolate or, it seems like a whole nother world. So it's like I have, in my mind, I'm likening it to like the Oscars. Is it kind of like winning an Oscar in the chocolate world?
It is. Those don't necessarily do trophies, from what I remember. We won a Sophie Award once, and that is very similar to an Oscar. It looks, I mean, the main difference is it looks like an Oscar with a chef's hat.
Oh, cute. I
That one's
love
based
that.
out of New York. And we won for our Belize bar, I think. But yeah, so the Academy of Chocolate and the International Chocolate Awards are huge organizations that they get literally thousands and thousands of bars from all around the world, and they have teams, huge teams of judges. So the last time I was in Peru, I had finished up working in Ukiali, and I had flown down to Lima because the Peruvian Cocoa Alliance, called Alianza Cacao, asked me to give a couple talks there on behalf of Ukiali. So I was at the Salon de Chocolate. And so at the Salon, the International Chocolate Awards was there, and they were doing judging for all the Peruvian chocolate makers, and they asked me to be a judge. So for 3 days, I tasted, I think it was 180, maybe 200 bars a day of
How do
samples.
I get that job?
You
How
don't
do I
want
get
that
that job?
job. You do not want that job. I promise you don't want that job. After like 8 or 10 different samples of chocolate, your palate's completely shut. So what they do is, if you're not familiar with polenta, it is a kind of like a cornmeal based kind of like a porridge a little bit, and a little bit of salt, and that's it. And when you eat that, it acts kind of like a scrubbing brush, and it cleans your palate off.
Oh,
So after
how
about
cool.
8 or 10 of those, you just take a couple bites of polenta. And my big problem was the amount of sugar that I was consuming every day. I mean, I was trying to drink a ton of water. I was trying to eat like a pretty big meal every day, but still, I mean, you start getting the shakes. And
Get the shakes. Yeah.
I was only doing dark chocolate. They asked me to be a judge for the milk chocolate and the white chocolate. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's too much sugar.
It still sounds like a dream to me because I like polenta too. So like polenta chocolate. That seems like a pretty good cycle for me. I'm not
It's,
gonna lie.
I mean, it's fascinating to see what people were doing with cacao. That in some cases, some farmers make chocolate from beans that they've grown themselves, and that's really cool. So instead of being bean to bar, that's called tree to bar, because like they have the trees and they go all the way to making the finished chocolate. It's very uncommon still, but it is starting to kind of becoming more of a thing, and I encourage that. I think that's incredible, and it's really important, I think, for farmers to taste chocolate made from their beans so that they can understand the decisions that they make way upstream
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely affect the end product,
Right,
right?
right, right.
So that's one of the things that we learned pretty early on, is that, if you have really good beans and you have a pretty mediocre or a bad ferment, you're not going to get good chocolate out of it. Now you can take kind of middle of the road beans, but do a really, really great job on the fermentation. You can make decent chocolate out of it. So fermentation is as important as the genetics of the beans themselves, if not more so, because again, you can have amazing cacao, but if you do a really bad job fermenting it, I mean, I tasted some beans, or I tasted some chocolate actually that were made from Papua New Guinea. And the problem with Papua New Guinea is that it rains so much. There's not enough sunlight to dry the beans out after you're done fermenting them. You have to dry them for about 2 to 3 weeks. So what they do is they put them out on these drying beds, and they have these diesel engines that are like spewing out this hot air, and they blast underneath the drying beds, then the heat rises and dries the beans. The problem is all that like petroleum, all the diesel actually seeps into the bean. You can
Yeah.
absolutely taste it. So I tasted a bean. It was made by a chocolate maker in Japan, of all places, and it literally tasted like a chocolate covered Slim Jim,
Oh
and
my God.
not in a good way. And I didn't find it pleasant at all. That's why we don't make a chocolate bar from Papua New Guinea, because we haven't found beans that are consistently free of that kind of diesel
Diesel
kind of
smell.
taste.
How interesting. I would never even think. I mean, do you think that it's possible for people like me to develop a palate like that for chocolate? I
Yeah,
mean,
of course.
to be able to distinguish. Yeah. So we're coming up on Halloween here pretty soon, and I have to ask, like, can you even eat regular chocolate, the candy bars, if you will, of that you'll typically find when kids are out there trick or treating? Can you even stomach those anymore? Does your family eat them?
Yeah. So what I say is that, say like a Butterfinger or a Hershey or whatever, it's candy. It's a completely different thing than what we do. It has its place, and I think it's totally fine. There are people who have told us, after doing a tour, that they couldn't tell the difference between our Ukiele bar and a Hershey bar.
What? Okay, well that's
No, that's
ludicrous.
totally fine. I mean, everyone's palate's different, and not everyone has a palate for it. And what I would say is, don't spend your money. If you can spend $1 and be perfectly happy, then that's fine. What we do is what we make is for people who want to spend a little bit more time with their food and really understand where their food comes from. And that's, it's a whole supply chain that we support because again, we're paying 5, 6, 7, 8 times what Hershey's is paying for their beans. And we really want our farmers to earn a living wage off of their work. So the entire pricing structure is completely different from, say, a Hershey bar, whereas, like I said, Hershey bar is 11% cacao, and they were paying like, maybe $1 a pound for that stuff, whereas we're paying, $8, $10, $12 a pound for our beans, depending on where it comes from.
Yeah. I can certainly taste the difference. And frankly, Hershey's bars have always been garbage to me. I mean, they just taste like wax. And, I don't have a sophisticated palate yet. And that's just all what it tastes like to me. But I have to kind of bring it full circle back to, as we start to wrap up here, to your first taste memory, which was, of course, this vanilla ice cream. And throughout all of your process of explaining to us what goes into your craft chocolate, I never heard you say vanilla. So you don't put any vanilla in your chocolate at all?
No, we did some tests very early on when we first started making chocolate. We even played around with the sugar. I mean, I think we played with like 30 or 40 different types of sweeteners. I mean, we tried sugar-free stuff. We tried, panela. We tried all sorts of crazy stuff. And in the end, we decided that we're spending so much money on these beans. We're paying so much money to these farmers. We really want their work to be front and center. So I have tasted some absolutely fantastic chocolate where they've added vanilla. I think it has its place. But for what we do, I really want you to really be able to enjoy the work that the farmers are doing as cleanly as possible. And so what I usually tell people is the trick to making really great chocolate is to get the best cocoa beans that you possibly can and get out of its way. Just stay out of its way. Let it do its thing. And just not try to really over process it. Don't overthink it. Just really just kind of let it be its own thing. So that's our philosophy. So maybe someday, we could do that. Now, one thing that I will say is that we do experiment a lot more with, things like vanilla or just different ingredients is our ice cream. So
Yeah.
we do make our Tanzania ice cream does have vanilla in it just because it really, when you think about ice cream, what you're mainly tasting is vanilla. And when we first started making it, we're like, well, we're not going to use vanilla because we don't use vanilla in our chocolate. And it didn't taste like ice cream.
Yeah.
Seriously, it
Yeah.
didn't, and so that has been something that we do add in for our ice cream for sure. And that really does actually help the flavor profile. But that's a different thing than, say, a 70% dark chocolate bar.
Well, it reminds me, I'm a movie buff myself, and you probably are as well to some degree. But have you seen the movies like Chocolat or Simply Irresistible or Like Water for Chocolate? Kind of this idea that not just that your emotions and kind of the way you're feeling goes into the foods that you make, but also in the case of Chocolat, that specifically about chocolate, the type of chocolate that you prefer to eat says a lot about you. So I'm going to ask you a question from Chocolat, but like, what's your favorite way to eat chocolate? Is it chocolate bar? Is it hot chocolate? Is it ice cream? Is it vanilla ice cream with chocolate on top? What's your favorite way to eat chocolate?
Favorite way to eat chocolate, when we make a batch of chocolate, I taste every single stage. So the unroasted beans we've tasted, the roasted beans we taste when we first load it in the grinder and it first starts, aerosolizing, we taste that. And, once, before we had the sugar, after we had the sugar. So what I would say is there really isn't anything quite like tasting melted tempered chocolate. And what I mean by that is after it's been aged, we melt it, right? But then we bring it up to the proper crystallization so that we can inject it into the chocolate mold and it'll solidify, right? But while it's in the bowl, it's a liquid stage and it's around 90 degrees. So when you dip a little tasting stick in that, like let's say if I'm making even like a mint bar or whatever, I have to like kind of dial that per batch. But tasting tempered chocolate that's melted is a pretty unique experience. When we were doing the tours, if we happen to have some chocolate at that stage, we would have people try it and they always freaked out. It's really, I think, one of the best ways. There's just no way to transport that because as soon as you bag it up, if it's under 85 degrees, it's going to turn solid.
Solidify. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, warm, gooey chocolate. Yes, that would be a great, very unique way to eat chocolate and share. Are you sick of chocolate yet?
No, so what I would say is the reason that it's still exciting and interesting and different every day is that every batch of chocolate that we make, we are always changing and we're always learning. So people will always say, well, you're on batch 135 of Belize, for example. It's like you've made it 134 times before this. Like, is it exactly the same? No, it's not. In fact, it's completely different. And so a couple things to that. One is that every harvest season that we bring in beans, they're different. We just got some beans from Ghana that are very different from what we had been working with before in a good way. And so now we're just kind of like tweaking it and trying to get it to where we like it. But we never settle on a very specific flavor profile and say, well, that's it. That being said, some beans are much more consistent than others. So like our Ecuador, we dialed that in probably back in 2015, and we haven't made as big of a change on that one over the years. I'd say, from batch 1 to 2, it's a big change. Then 2 to 3, it's less, then it gets smaller and smaller. But there are a lot of levers that you have to pull in order to make a batch. And so we're always like, well, I think next time I make it, I'm going to try doing this. Or, oh, what if I add the sugar an hour earlier or an hour later? I mean, there's so many things. There's so many permutations you can do. You can never be done. So what we tell people is we've never made a finished batch of chocolate. It's all a work in progress.
Wow.
And I don't know if I'm ever going to make a finished chocolate bar. Now, people have asked us about doing blends. Like a lot of chocolate makers will blend 3 or 4 or 5 different origins together. We've thought about that. It's something that I think is on our radar, but that's going to be something that, I would be willing to explore once I feel that, okay, we've pretty much maxed out every last little possible thing that we can get out of that bean. We can't take it any further than we've taken it. And I haven't felt that way about any of the beans we've worked with yet.
Wow. Well, it has been such a joy just, hearing about chocolate from this totally, totally different perspective and frankly, scientific and truly, truly artisanal. It's so impressive. And, I could talk to you for so much longer about chocolate, but we are just about out of time here today. So I want to wrap us up by asking the same question that we end our show with every time, which is, we've been talking about chocolate, but if we were to talk about a regular meal, do you have a dream dinner? And you could even throw in dessert if you want, since we're chocolate, but is there something from anywhere in the world, from any time in the world, if you could have for dinner tonight, what would it be?
One of the most amazing dishes I've ever had in my life was right here in LA. It was at a French restaurant called Belize. Chef Josiah Citron makes a brown butter risotto that I've never had anything better in my life. And only certain times of the year, I think it's like November, December each year, he'll get white truffles and they'll shave the white truffles on the top. So one time, Corey and I, we were there celebrating this several years ago, and we got that as part of our tasting dish, or our tasting meal. And that was just one course. And we both kind of looked at each other after taking a bite, and we were just like, this is the most insanely amazing thing we've ever had. So I actually flagged down a waiter and I said, I'm really sorry, but stop everything. Just stop the meal. I want another one of those. And they're like, but we're in the middle of dinner. I'm like, I know.
Please.
I'm sorry. Please do it again.
Oh my God,
So
that's amazing.
they accommodated us, and it was amazing. And so they were able to bring it out, and they got us this again. And I think it was so good. I think I remember we went back the following week because it was like the last week that they had white truffles. It's like, hey, let's just do it. And it was absolutely worth every penny. And I still think about that dish from time to time. I liken it to, did you ever see that movie Ratatouille?
Did I ever see Ratatouille? Of course.
So remember when the food critic tastes Remy's Ratatouille at the very end of the movie, and it does that crazy zoom, and it takes him back to his childhood after he'd like skinned his knee after being like thrown off a bike or whatever.
Yeah.
And his mom like made this dish, and it's like that, but for me, it's like waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning in like the Redwood National Forest. You have like the smoldering embers from the fire from the night before, and you can smell like the wet earth and the dew on the branches everywhere. That's what that dish is like for me.
Wow. Wow. That's the power of food. And that's sort of the inspiration for this podcast is the transportive nature of food, how it can take us to different places. And I love that you took us to the Redwood Forest with this dream dinner of yours. It sounds amazing. I'll have to check it out sometime. And I just want to say that, your chocolate does that for people too. I didn't tell you this, but after leaving your tasting at at your shop, I started writing a novel all about chocolate. I mean, it's garbage and it hasn't gone anywhere, but I was so inspired and so caught up in the mystery and the romance and the adventure of this process of chocolate making that is just so much more than just, maybe what some chocolatiers, not all of course, but mixing things together. It was really, really this adventure, this experience in a chocolate bar. So,
Wow.
you are giving people those experiences too. And I thank you for that. Well,
Thank you.
that's it for us today. I want everybody to know where they can find you because I'm local to LA, so I'm lucky. I get to just come and order chocolate and pick it up. How can everybody else in the world interact with you on social or if they want to get your chocolate?
Yeah, we're on social media, so we're like, on Facebook, Instagram, things like that. Just LetterPress Chocolate. And so we do curbside pickup in LA. So, letterpresschocolate.com, do curbside pickup. We also do ship nationwide. We typically get stuff out the same week that people order. It just depends on the time of year. We do try to, fulfill that as fast as possible. And we are kind of at the mercy of the weather. So if it is really hot, we have to, we'll always email you and say, hey, it's gonna be really hot. Are you cool waiting a couple of days? And usually people are like, oh yeah, we'll wait for it to cool down. But we do like ice packs, all that fun stuff. Yeah, we ship nationwide, but then also we are distributed. So we're in a bunch of stores. There's a store locator on our website. So just go to letterpresschocolate.com and you can actually see a store locator, and then you can see on the map, kind of like you just put in your address or a zip code, and it'll show you all the stores in your area that you can get our chocolate at.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, well, for my friends and family who are listening in Virginia, get on that website and check it out. It's my favorite gift now to give to family or, just as a whole thing, because your chocolate is not inexpensive. It's craft chocolate and it's worth every penny. And that's why I like to savor it more than anything. I'm like, girl, you got to make this last. This chocolate bar is too much of an experience. Well, I can't thank you enough, David, for taking the time to talk with me about chocolate making, and the delicious story that is LetterPress chocolate. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone, that's our show for the week. Thank you so much for joining along with us. Hey, please tell a friend about the show. If you're loving it and you've made it this far, make sure you tell someone who might also love food as much as you do about our little podcast here. It means so much to independent podcasters like me. And of course, make sure you are subscribed to the show on Apple Podcasts. That helps us a lot too. So thanks everybody so much for listening. Stay tuned for next week. We have a really special episode lined up. It's going to take us to the central coast of California to talk about a little thing called Santa Maria style barbecue. You don't want to miss it. We'll see you right back here for the next episode.